Wait a minute, did I just stab that guy in the dick? So I've been watching Obi-Wan, which kinda got me in a Star Wars mood. Since the Fallen Order sequel isn't coming out anytime soon, might as well revisit some of the classics. The problem though was which one, because Star Wars as a franchise has produced a shitload of games, let me tell ya. Most of it being rushed out junk, but there have been some bangers. Everybody has fond memories of the Knights of the Old Republic and Battlefront games, which of course are great games, but the stuff I personally played the most were these two bad boys right here. Yeah, The Force Unleashed was my shit back in the day. The reason is because no other Star Wars media at the time presented the Force in such an OP stylish way. Seriously, the feats of Force in this game are no joke, which kinda pisses me off that we don't see this type of shit in the movies. Yeah, I know it cost them like $1 trillion to do shit like this on the regular, but it's Star Wars, they'll make their money back. But yeah, the Force Unleashed games were the first to really put you in the shoes of an all-powerful Force user, and especially with the first game, it worked with the marketing because this game sold like crack. At the time, it was the fastest selling Star Wars game, competing with other industry big boys like Halo, Call of Duty, and GTA. I personally remember this game being hyped out the ass on outlets like G4, and looking back, it's actually understandable considering this was the first big budget Star Wars game on 7th gen consoles. Not only that, but this game was made by LucasArts themselves and promised to deliver a canon story between the prequels and originals. Yeah, for a while all this shit was actually canon, and there was supposed to be a third game, but in 2012, Disney came along and decided to pull the plug on all of that. A shitload of fiction including these games got retconned, which had fans like,
"But you did this for what?
Why not?
Why?
Why not?"
Why though?
Upon replaying these games though, I can see why they're not brought up very much when we're talking about the best Star Wars games, because there's some glaring flaws with both of them that I'll get into later. For now, what the hell was The Force Unleashed 1 about? So The Force Unleashed takes place in between the first two Star Wars trilogies where the Empire was at its peak doing Empire things. They're hunting down the rest of the Jedi, with Darth Vader in particular hunting down a Jedi on the planet of Kashyyyk. He finds him, whoops his ass, and almost kills him until he senses a greater force power, which turns out to be the guy's son. Vader ends up offing the Jedi anyway, but when stormtroopers are about to execute the son, Vader kills them instead and takes the kid as a secret apprentice. The kid's name is Galen Merrick, but because that name is dumb, we're just going to refer to him as his alias, Starkiller. Years later, as an adult, Starkiller is now a fully fledged Sith who has now been tasked by Vader to not only kill the rest of the Jedi, but also join him in assassinating the Emperor in some secret plan later on. So of course this game isn't looking like much these days, but in 2008, this was some top tier shit. There's mad detail in all these environments, and that classic Star Wars aesthetic is oh so present in each setting. Those blaster and lightsaber sounds are music to my ears, boy. They even got some John Williams music in this game. The facial animations are pretty impressive for the time too. This is the late 2000s where mocap was just starting to get good, and it definitely shows for this game. Despite the graphics looking a little fuzzy, there's still a good deal of emotion expressed from the characters' faces in these cutscenes, especially from Sam Witwer, who plays Starkiller. On top of that, the voice acting is A1, mimics that quick proper speak out of the movies. Coolest thing about this game hands down is the physics. They had to get this right or else the force powers wouldn't feel as good. There are so many damn objects in this game that can get pushed or lifted up by the force, and a lot of these objects aren't small either. Your lightsaber can cut down trees and shit. Your force pushes causes people to turn into ragdolls, which is both badass and hilarious at the same time. The game knows it too because sometimes the camera zooms in to whoever gets tossed like a sack of potatoes. I love how enemies actually have some sense of self-preservation. Like you can force grab a guy near another guy or object and they'll grab onto that shit for dear life. You try to toss stuff at them and they'll try to duck out the way. All this doesn't really sound like much, but when enemies actually value their own lives, it adds a layer of believability in each encounter. Shit, I know if I was a stormtrooper, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near a Jedi. Don't know what fucking magic tricks they were doing with this engine to get this all working, but it definitely paid off because the chaos of all this debris flying around is immensely entertaining. This is still the coolest implementation of the Force in a video game, and the sound effects that go along with them make you feel like a god. Unfortunately, this is where my praises end for a bit because man, this game is bugs galore. For anyone thinking of copying this game on Steam, reconsider because there was no love put into that port. Got to download a bunch of third-party softwares just to get the game running at a proper 1080p. I said fuck that noise and decided to just fire up the old 360, which is the most stable version, but even then I was still running into a lot of game-breaking bugs. We're talking about enemies just standing in place, assets not loading in, boss health bars not appearing, the audio just going out randomly. Man, the last one was happening to me constantly. The background music for these levels would just not play. Darth Vader's theme is supposed to be playing during all this, by the way. It shouldn't be said, but shit like this shouldn't happen, and it really takes you out of it when it does.
What is the core gameplay?
That's practically all you need to know about the main gameplay loop of this game. You walk through linear pathways, destroying anything in your path with your Sith powers. Once in a while you have to do some platforming and move obstacles out the way, but it's pretty minimal. I already went over how awesome it is tearing through enemies with your Force powers, but I was only talking about your standard Force stuff. Starkiller is a Sith after all, which means you got forced lightning that you can bust out at any time, and you will be busting it out often due to how overpowered it is. It just melts and stuns everything from minor stormtroopers to big ass rancors. I'm pretty sure that this game wants me to fight this giant junk monster fairly, but why do that when I could just do this? Man, if the Sith wanted to get more people on their side, all they had to say was lightning. You can combine Force abilities with your lightsaber attacks for some combos, but I'm just gonna be honest, the lightsaber stuff in this game does not feel good at all. It just feels so stilted, there's not many combos to work with, and the Force attacks don't flow into each other smoothly. Add the fact that mad enemies in the latter half block all your attacks, and it makes you never want to use the damn thing. The spectacle of these QTEs can't hide how truly clunky the combat in this game is. Oh, it's not just the lightsaber that's unsatisfying, even the Force powers can be full of shit too. And it all stems from this shitty ass camera and god awful lock-on system. The camera in this game is so stiff, it's simply way too slow for the action at hand. I upped it to the maximum sensitivity and it was still rigid. And the lock-on system, oh my goodness, it single-handedly brings this whole game down a letter grade because half of the time, it just doesn't work. You want to force toss something forward? Watch that shit go left. Want to shock somebody in front of you? Well, this game thinks it's the guy next to him. Don't even get me started on that crappy Star Destroyer part where you have to take down all these TIE fighters. This is when the crappy lock-on system truly reveals how unresponsive it is. Sometimes you can grab these things out the sky, and other times you just can't. I know I'm going on a bit about this, but it really makes everything involving the combat way more aggravating than it needs to be. You add a crap camera and clunky controls in the mix, and the whole thing just doesn't feel right. The unpolishedness bleeds into the Jedi fights where I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing in these. Sometimes they block all your Force attacks, sometimes they block all your lightsaber attacks, and other times they're just randomly vulnerable to everything. I found the most consistent way to deal with these guys is to Force pulse when they're close, and then Force grab while they're down, and then stab them again while they're down again. It's an effective way to down most of these guys. The only problem is that it's not satisfying. These are supposed to be epic lightsaber duels, but it can't be one if one side is just throwing random shit at the wall. Also, is it just me or is the difficulty in this game all over the damn place? Like, you'll have a string of sections where you could just force blast your way through everything, but then the game decides to ambush you with like 3 of these robots and a bunch of snipers and shit. There's no truly reliable way to avoid damage in this game except for this dash, which is alright as a platforming tool but sucks as a dodge. What's also pretty frustrating is how enemies can still damage you while you're down. It's pretty damn cheap and just another thing that just shouldn't happen. There should definitely be some invincibility frames on these. As far as power-ups, you got these holocrons tucked away in each level, which helps in quickly upgrading your force powers and dressing up Starkiller. Unless you're a completionist, these don't really matter that much. Can't really say I felt Starkiller getting stronger with these upgrades since he's already pretty OP from the start. Not to mention that this game was only 9 levels long, which means you'll probably beat it before you even get half of these upgrades. Don't understand why Starkiller doesn't have these abilities from the start though. I mean, didn't he complete his Sith training? You just randomly get Force Lightning and some other abilities in the beginning of some of these earlier levels, almost like he just remembered he can do this shit. Okay, so I've been ragging on this game for a minute, but that's only because there was so much unrealized potential in this game. You could tell that it was rushed out due to all the technical issues and short runtime. Despite all that, I still had fun coming back to this game, and that's purely because of the Force powers. Yeah, it's that fun fucking around with the Force in this game. There's a reason why games like Control would make it their main gameplay mechanic a decade later. I just wish that the rest of the game was up to snuff.
You are Vader's slave, but your power is wasted with him. You could be so much more.
You will never convince me to betray my master.
Poor boy. The Sith always betray one another. But I'm sure you'll learn that soon enough.
The story's a mixed bag for most people, but I always thought that it was pretty solid. Yeah, Starkiller isn't a very charismatic protagonist, but how could he be when he's raised by Darth Vader as a killing machine? His arc from ruthless Sith to noble Jedi was handled as well as it could have been considering the short length of this game. Kinda mirrors Anakin's fall to the dark side but in reverse. You got these kids raised to be emotionally stunted warriors doing everything their masters asked of them, only to be let down by said masters when they need him the most. With Anakin, it was the Jedi Council disregarding his feelings towards his mother, and Padme eventually leading him to the dark side. For Starkiller, it was his feelings towards Juno and Darth Vader betraying him twice, eventually leading him towards the good side. It's pretty ironic that the former is the latter's master, almost like Darth Vader is taking out his past trauma onto Starkiller. I don't know if that was intentional, but that's just how I read their dynamic.
There is much conflict in you. Your feelings for your new allies are growing stronger. Do not forget that you still serve me.
I hate being him.
I think he does too.
I like how with each level our perspective goes away from the Empire and shifts towards the Alliance. It also reflects Starkiller growing more into a good guy as the game goes on. I mean, think about it. The game starts off with you playing as Darth Vader wreaking havoc, and then you play as Starkiller invading planets killing Jedi. And then you have to go back to the same planets, practically undoing what you did prior. And then the game ends with you invading the freaking Death Star, symbolizing Starkiller officially being done with Vader and the Empire. I thought that was pretty cool, but the abrupt choice to finish off Vader or the Empire was pretty stupid, mostly because we know that either choice doesn't really matter. LucasArts kind of wrote themselves in a hole utilizing such important characters to the movies because we know for a fact that nothing is going to happen to them. All of them have to be alive and unscathed for the movies, which kind of takes out a lot of the stakes. Much of the story does feel like fan fiction too, like really, the reason the rebellion is a thing is because of Starkiller and he just so happens to be the strongest Force user alive. Also, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but why in a universe as expansive as Star Wars with a million different races and planets, we always have to play as boring ass humans? Anybody else notice that? Anyway, going back to the fanfiction stuff, the DLCs are just that. 2 out of 3 of them explore the bad ending with Starkiller being turned into a second Darth Vader. You don't get any new abilities or anything, it's just asking the question, what if an evil Starkiller was in the original movies? And the answer is that the Empire would win in a landslide because the good guys are no fucking match. You don't just whoop Obi-Wan's ass, you kick his ass as a spirit too. I don't know how that works, but it just goes back to Starkiller being way too powerful for his own good. Even Luke gets the smoke. Only one of the DLCs has you playing as a regular Starkiller, and that's the Jedi Temple. There's not really much to say about this one, it's more just the main game but in a new area. These platform puzzles were way more involved than anything in the base game, and the fight with your alternate evil self was cool if a bit random. So yeah, that's pretty much The Force Unleashed 1. It's not aged the greatest and is way more unpolished than I remember, but you know, I still had a decent time with it. Pretty hard to recommend since all the modern ports are ass, but shit, if you're a Star Wars fan and you got some old consoles lying around, you might as well give this a spin. Anyway, now that that's over with, we can move on to the sequel, which came out just 2 years later. I remember this one being nowhere near as hyped as the first one. Guess the first one really soured people's expectations since it was overhyped. This one not so much, but it somehow managed to disappoint people even more. After replaying this game myself, I can see why. Despite not having many technical issues, it feels like a sequel made out of obligation rather than passion. I'll expound upon that more later, but for now, what's the premise of this one? Well, this game takes place after the good ending of The Force Unleashed, where Starkiller got fried by the Emperor. And for those that haven't played this are probably already wondering, well, he looks to be alive and well, what the fuck? Well, that's the neat thing. This isn't Starkiller, but a clone Darth Vader made from the original. He's been trying to create the perfect apprentice ever since the original went down, but the memories of the original always seem to seep into the clones. After failing to cut down a hologram with Juno, new Starkiller remembers that Darth Vader betrayed him. So he shocks his ass and makes a break for it. For the rest of the game, Starkiller is in search of his former lover Juno, while a bunch of different outside forces try to make that difficult. So immediately, this game looks way better than the first. Holy shit. People forget that later 7th gen games looked a lot better than early ones, and this game is proof in the pudding despite coming out just 2 years later. Everything from the character models to the environments are a lot more detailed than the first. Animations are sharper, power effects are flashier, and this game goes way further than the first in the spectacle of these QTEs. Game doesn't look half bad even compared to these days. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for how it runs. Yeah, they didn't learn their lesson because this is yet another one where I have to brush off the old 364. The PC port is yet again ass, where you have to tinker a bunch to get it working properly. I'm too lazy for all that, but even on the 360 I was running into issues with the game constantly freezing. It was like every flashy attack my game would freeze for like a millisecond, which doesn't sound like much, but trust me, it is noticeable. Fuck the look though, the real question is if they improve the gameplay, because as we know the first game was pretty rough around the edges, and thankfully they have. For one, the lock-on system isn't atrocious anymore. It actually targets the things that you want now and launches them in the right direction. Oh, and look at that, the camera's brought back a bit and not as stiff as a brick. I'm already liking the feel of this game over the first, and it doesn't end there. I must have not been the only one disappointed with the lightsaber in the first game, because you get 2 of them bitches in this one, and you can go absolutely apeshit on guys. Feels like a proper hack and slash now. The force powers have taken a little dip in terms of power. The force push isn't as large, and you can't spam fuck lightning for as long. But don't get it twisted, the force powers are still just as fun to mess around with. The hilarious physics have made a return with most of your force powers from the first game. Only thing that didn't make a return is the lightning shield, which has been replaced by Jedi mind tricks where you can mind control an enemy into fighting for you. It's not that useful, but it is pretty amusing to pull off mid-fight. The last new addition is the Force Rage transformation, where your force powers are like 3 times stronger. It's your standard transformation when you're getting overwhelmed, which shouldn't happen often since this game is pretty easy. Yeah, no abrupt spikes in difficulty like in the first. This is smooth sailing throughout. It seems like there was a real effort in streamlining everything because not only are there less enemy types overall, they did away with most of these god-awful duel fights. All the bosses in this game are traditional big monsters with weak spots to focus on, and thank God for that. Jedi fights in the first game were clusterfucks. These things may be more generic, but at least there's a clear way to fight them. Some people are probably wondering by now, but Josh, with all these improvements, how can you say that this is a game made out of obligation? Well, it's because there's barely any of it. This game is only 4 hours long with 4 levels. Yeah, you heard me right, not even half the length of the first game. Don't let the mission select fool you either, most of these are just different parts of the same level. The first level is you escaping Camino, and then 3 levels later you're right back in that bitch fighting Vader. I don't normally complain about video game length since I do like shorter, compact experiences, but this is just blue balls, man. You're telling me that you can make this intermission level just visiting the woods but not an actual one with enemies? It's a shame too, since the handful of levels here are actually better than anything in the previous game. The pacing is just all around better, not holding on to any encounter or spectacle for too long. Only part where that's not the case is the final showdown with Vader, which is mostly just fighting off clones. You don't get enough shots in on Vader, and the whole thing just goes on for way too long.
You are a shadow, form a self. You are a fool to face me alone.
You'll have to kill me this time!
Starkiller could not kill me. What hope do you have?
I've defeated you before, I will do it again!
Yeah, we should probably talk about the story for a minute, which disappointed me even as a kid. LucasArts claims that this is a more personal story for Starkiller, but I just don't buy that. In the first game, he actually went through some character development, forming bonds with Alliance members and becoming disillusioned with the dark side. In this game, he doesn't give a shit about nothing or nobody outside of Juno. He struggles with his identity as a clone for like all of 2 seconds. All of this makes it pretty hard to root for the guy this time around, especially since he's not technically the same guy. Once again, the length of this game hurts it, as there's barely any time for anything to happen. Vader's on the cover of this game, but that motherfucker only shows up for like 3 scenes. You go on this long ass mission to save Coda, which mostly results in Starkiller not listening to him for the rest of the game, and Juno is even more of a damsel in distress than before. Did she even get any lines until the end? There's yet another choice during the end to either spare or kill Darth Vader, and once again, it really doesn't matter. Vader has to live through this story, so even when you pick the option to kill him, some out of nowhere bullshit like an evil clone killing Starkiller has to happen. The light side ending is a bit more satisfying with Vader captured and Starkiller reunited with Juno. Sadly, we'll never know what happened to them since all this shit is non-canon now anyway. We get another DLC indulging in some fanfiction though. This one continues the dark Starkiller ending with evil Starkiller raiding planet Endor. You know that planet in Return of the Jedi with all the Ewoks? Yeah, this DLC actually takes place during that. It's pretty identical to the first game's DLC where you make quick work of the good guys. It's actually disrespectful how easily you dispatch of them, but considering how powerful Starkiller is, I believe it. Only one that stood a chance is Leia, who took up being a Jedi after Luke's death. The fight with her is actually pretty solid, which makes me think they could have pulled off doing these solo duel fights in the base game. So yeah, that's both Star Wars The Force Unleashed 1 and 2. Man, both of these games definitely could have used more time in the oven. First game's a proper length, but there was just way too many technical issues to look past. Second game is not as clunky, but there's barely any content to speak of. Despite the big flaws of both games, I can't say I didn't have some fun with these games. Are they as good as I remember? Not really, but the Force, the physics, and the Star Wars aesthetics are all here and enjoyable. Wish both of these games had better ports, but what are you gonna do? Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. Like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and until next time.